Want to learn about writing board books? Then this is a show for you. Hi, I'm author Tonya Ellis with another episode of Write This, my author interview show. And today I am excited to welcome Lisa Perron, an author and poet who has published several board books. And it's going to be great to have her on and learn about creating board books, what the process is, and get tips that you can use on your writing journey. I see that she has already popped on, so I'm going to invite her in to join us. And I want to thank all of you all who have tuned in or who've come in. We'll get questions in the chat, and we're going to have a great time today. So this is going to be amazing. I can't wait. Her books are beautiful, and I'm excited to have her share them with us. I personally have never delved into writing board books, so it's going to be fun to learn about differences in the process for creating board books versus creating longer picture books. So I have sent Lisa. Thank you guys all for coming in. See, here she is. Hey, how you doing?
Hi, I'm good. How are you?
Fine. It's so good to see you. Now, you're
Am
sideways on.
Okay, let me see if I can fix
But
that.
thank you so much for joining me. Loving the covers of your books that I've seen, and I'm really excited to talk to you about writing picture or board books in particular, because personally, I mentioned a few minutes ago, I've never delved into writing board books, even though I've enjoyed reading them to my kids when they were smaller. So I'm curious to learn if there are major differences in writing board books than writing picture books or regular picture books. So can you tell us a little bit about yourself? Where are you from? And share a little bit about your author journey. Uh-oh, now we can't hear you. So you're on mute.
Okay. Can you hear me now?
Yes, I can.
Okay. All right. So I'm calling in from Boston, the Boston area. I grew up mostly in Pennsylvania and Ohio, and I've lived on both coasts, but now I've been in Boston for several years. Mm-hmm. And I started in Kidlit, I'd say in earnest, about 5 years ago. I have been writing poetry and songs for most of my life, but I didn't start writing specifically for kids until about 2018, when I started actually drafting a middle grade novel. And then from there, I started writing some picture books and joined 12 by 12, the 12 by 12 picture book writing challenge. And then just kept going from there.
That's wonderful. And it's amazing that you were into music and poetry. So what got you interested in those areas?
Well, that's a good question. I mean, I've always just loved writing, and I've always loved rhyme. So most of my books out so far, coming out, are rhyming books. And I think largely because I love the musicality of it. And so as a kid, I started playing the guitar and messing around, kind of making up songs and things on the guitar. And that just translated really well to writing poetry as well.
Right. And you know what I noticed, Lisa, is that I have gotten more and more into writing picture books. I started out writing chapter books and middle grade novels. And now I listen to music differently, or like I'm listening to the lyrics differently as I'm writing more poetry and lyrical language, is what I've noticed. So it's really interesting.
Yeah, that's great.
Yeah, it's really fun. It's a lot of fun. And I love poetry so much. So I guess that comes hand in hand with writing these picture books and board books. Now tell us about your book. Show me. I didn't put one of your books. They're just covers. Show us some of those.
Sure. I'm going to try to fix my setup a minute here, because I think I had it going in the wrong orientation. So let me just fix this so that maybe you can see me a little bit. Maybe that's not going to work. I'll put you down here. Okay, so I can have my hands free. So my most recent book is Tell Me About Space, which is with Little Simon, illustrated by Jennifer Faulkner. And what I love about this one, it has spot gloss. I don't know if you can see on the cover here on the title and the mom and the child.
Oh.
So it has a nice sort of drawing in of the kid. And then the board book I had that came out this summer was My Love for You, which is also with Little Simon. And that's illustrated by Cheryl Murray. And then not a board book, but my first book, my debut, was nonfiction Patterns Everywhere that came out with Millbrook Press, with Learner, this spring. And that is, as you can see, photo illustrated.
Okay. Now, Lisa, can you tell us what is the difference between a board book and a regular? What's
Sure. So the first difference that I would, can you hear me okay?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. The first difference that I would point out is the length. So picture books, often 32 pages, sometimes 40 pages. Board books will tend to be shorter. So when I write a picture book, I think in spreads. So usually I think about 13 to 14 spreads, which is the 2 pages facing each other. When I write board books, I think usually about 10 spreads. So shorter than picture books, and not just in terms of the total number of pages, but also usually the words per page. So you definitely can have some very spare picture book text. But with a board book, a lot of it is very visual. And so you're going to be focusing a bit less often on the amount of the words. There's also the tactile nature of a board book, right? So the rounder edges, the thicker stock of the paper so that you can not tear it. Kids can interact with the books, right? Hold the books, love the books, in a way that really builds their early relationship with reading, where they feel that sense of ownership of the book, which I really like about board books. And then the other piece that I think really is important with board books is them being interactive in some way. So that doesn't necessarily mean flaps. It can sometimes, right, or textures, but even just interactive with the colors. Sometimes you'll find there's a lot of brightness in a board book, or things where you can really pause and point things out to the reader. Sometimes the interactive piece has to do with the rhythm or the rhyme. Sometimes there's a repetition, a refrain, and that's another way that I think we can pull the reader in so that they feel part of that reading process.
Right. And when you were talking, I was thinking about a book I used to read to my kids called Peek-a-Who, and it's a mirror in there. And then when they were babies and they could see themselves in the mirror book.
Yes. One of my kids' favorites was, I have it here, it's Pink Wiggly Pig, I think, What Do You Wish For? And at the end, there's a mirror, and it's, sleepy child. Oh. What do you wish for? And it is really nice for them to have that moment of feeling included in the book. Yeah.
Wish for the sleepy child too. Go to bed, please. Now, when writing, are you thinking of these things? What's your process for writing a board book? And you any words? You said there are fewer words. Around how many words are in a board book?
Well, in My Love for You, I think it's maybe around 175. It might be less than that. So I'll tell you a little bit about the process for these board books, because they were a little bit different than how I might have approached it if I just set out to write a board book. I actually wrote My Love for You first as a picture book. And my agent submitted it as a picture book, but then the editor said, I really like this. I think it would be a great board book. Could you make it into a board book? Now, it wasn't as simple as just cutting spreads, because even though with a board book, you don't have to have a narrative arc, right? You can have, some board books are largely words and images, but I like to create a bit of an arc, even if there's not a true narrative, like a traditional narrative. So I wanted to have this one be over the course of a day. And so if I just cut some spreads, there were things missing in the day, right? I didn't want to just cut the bath time or cut the meal or cut the reading the book before bed. So I had to splice some of those scenes together to cut it down to 10 spreads to make it work as a board book. So for that one, it was about editing it down. And actually a simpler process with Tell Me About Space. That was also one that I had written as a picture book. Actually, I wrote a completely different book. And the editor liked the sense of wonder. She liked that there was curiosity, but she said, I think I really want a board book about space. And I want, I think that we could have a series with that. And so the other book, I said, I'll set that aside, and ended up selling that separately. I said, I'll write a board book about space and pitch some additional ideas. My agent suggested I do that. So that's how that book came to be. So that one I did write specifically as a board book, but it came to be through that suggestion.
That's really interesting. Yeah. Now, are there authors who specifically write board books, or how is that? Because I know in the 12 by 12 picture book challenge, I don't hear too many people talking about that. So that's why you're very, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, there are certainly people who I'd say the bread and butter of what they write is board books. Sandra Boynton comes to mind as one of the very most famous people. Many times it's picture book authors who also write board books. I think that if you're querying agents and you query with a board book, my sense is that that's trickier than querying with putting your picture books first and kind of having those be what you lead with, and then mentioning that you also write board books. And I think there's a couple of reasons for that. Particularly if you're an author only, and I'm not an illustrator. So as only writing the text, one piece of it is that board books have a much lower sale point. So this one is, $7.99 for a board book. So the amount that the publisher's making on the books is lower. So you generally are going to get a bit of a lower advance than you would with a picture book. It depends.
Smaller too, because it's just smaller children, whereas a picture book would go across a wider range of children.
Right. So the board book age is usually, they say 0 to 3. Sometimes kids will read them longer. But right, so you have that shorter window of time too. So I think one reason that agents tend to not sign just board book authors, as far as I've heard, is partly because of that, and then partly just because there aren't as many editors who really focus on board books. So some houses, actually, most of their board books will be picture books that they publish so that they turn into board books.
Oh.
And then other houses will do books that are initially designed as board books, which Little Simon, which is the publisher of My Love for You and the Tell Me About series, they publish board books that start as board books and are meant to be board books.
And you're saying Tell Me About series, so that space book is one. So do you have others coming out?
Yes. So that one, so when I wrote the Tell Me About Space book, I also wrote some ideas, some pitches to the editor, and she chose Oceans as the companion title, so a series for that. So that will come out in April. Tell Me About Oceans.
Yeah, so that's really smart that you're thinking ahead when you're planning your stories. So that's really a great thing to do.
Yeah, I think a lot of that depends on if an editor is interested in a series, or if you have a topic that lends itself to a series. So I knew in this case that she was interested in considering more than one title. And then I had to think about, how similar would they be? So I pitched it just with the idea of these other topics, but when I was writing it, it really lent itself to having similar phrasing. So the Tell Me About Space starts off, tell me why the sun goes down, what happens to its light. Tell Me About Ocean starts off, tell me why the ocean moves in waves that splish and splash. So both of them are conversations between a child and a parent. They're different children, different parents, but a similar structure, that same repetition with the questions, and then they have a very similar sort of winding down at the end. So I think when you're writing a series, it's helpful to think about what ties those books together in the series. Is it that there's a main character that ties them together? Is it the topic? Is it that the structure of the books themselves that makes for a series?
Cool. Now, someone asked, are there any specific publishers you'd recommend to get your?
So Little Simon, definitely, with Simon & Schuster, does board books. Penguin, Random House, Doubleday, they do board books as well. And Amicus Inc. Julie Avery has some lovely board books with them. And they I'm not sure if they accept unagented submissions or not. But I think they do some. They're not as big of a publisher, but they do some really lovely board books.
Okay. And then they were asking the number of pages in the board book, but you said it's about 10.
About 10 spreads.
10.
So that would be 20 pages.
Okay, 20.
It varies, but those are the ones that I've done have been 10 spreads.
And then that would be about, she said, about 100 words. And to put that in perspective, picture books would be from 500 to 1,000 words standard.
So yeah, so My Love for You is shorter. Tell Me About Space is a little bit unique for a board book because it has the main text, so the rhyming text, which is short, as you can see, but then it has sidebars, which is unusual. So little text boxes, that's not common for board books, but this publisher liked the idea of having it be accessible for kids who wanted to know more, where they could find out more, or if parents wanted to say, wait, how fast does the earth spin, right? Or an older sibling who might be reading as well. So it gives that a little bit of an older reach for a book that normally would only appeal to the younger audience.
And I remember seeing those kind of books with my kids when they were smaller. Yes, that are more scientific information or historical things.
Yeah.
Or something like that.
Yeah. So with nonfiction, it's nice to give those extra layers in the text where they're optional to read more, but they're there if you choose to.
That's cool. So you mentioned early on that you had written some novels or longer works. What kind of projects do you have planned or coming up in the future?
So I'm always writing a lot. I have a middle grade novel, historical novel, that is actually on sub now. And I'm drafting some other middle grade, and I actually recently started a YA thriller. We'll see how that goes. But in terms of the books I have coming out, as I mentioned, I have the companion title to Tell Me About Space, which is Tell Me About Oceans. And then I have a nonfiction nonfiction picture book that I co-authored with my husband, who's a geologist, about rocks, that's coming out next summer. And then I have 2 books coming out in 2025, picture books.
Now, do you have kids? Do you have children?
I do. Yes.
Now, what do they think about you and your husband writing together?
They like when the books come out and they get very excited. They sometimes get a little bit frustrated with the amount of time it takes, right? And I'm sure a lot of parents can relate to this, where they can tell that, you know, you're thinking about something, you're having a conversation, you say, oh, sorry, I just had that line in my head that I just, right? Or if at the dinner table, my husband and I will be discussing something and they'll say, you know, enough with the books. They secretly like it, but sometimes they complain.
Oh, that's really interesting. That's fun that you can do that and share that together. Because I know my husband, he doesn't really write. So sometimes, especially with picture books, and I'm trying to explain, okay, you got to visualize, and they're like, what is she talking about? Now I see there's one more last question. I have to get close because I can't see out there. So what's the age range for board book? And we mentioned that, but
so we typically people will say 0 to 3. I sometimes like to think of it as 0 to 5 because I do think kids will read them longer. And then someone was asking about the size of the book as well. So you will usually see board books being a smaller size, right? As opposed to, and even this is a picture book, but it's more square than a lot of the ones you'll see. There are some board books that are more of a picture book size, but they will do them on the cardstock paper or board stock. Is that what it's called?
I have seen some of those. Yeah. Okay. I know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So sometimes you'll see that, but it's most common to see board books small, and then you'll see them shelved, you know, in a library. Sometimes they'll have some smaller shelving for them as well. And they're just easy for little hands to hold. And again, you have that interaction piece with them so that the kids really can, you know, love them, hug them, kiss them, chew on them, whatever they choose to do.
Right. And I have some that we've had for years. I have my Goodnight Moon and some other little I love my hair. This one that we've had for years. So those are sweet things to hold on to and to keep.
They are. It's funny you mention that because I actually had a bag of board books because my kids are no longer board book age. I had a bag of them that I was getting ready to donate when I got the request from this publisher to turn My Love for You into a board book. And I said, wait, where's that bag? And I went and I looked and I read a bunch and I ended up just keeping them because once I had them out again, my kids said, oh, I remember this one. Now, I don't know that they consciously remember reading all of them, but they definitely just seeing the covers, they had such fond memories. And I said, oh, I can't get rid of these now. So I've added them to my bookshelf to keep.
Right. It's a great part of a child's life, and you're playing that role. So kudos to you for doing that. Now, where can people find you if they want to look up your books afterwards and buy them?
Sure, they can find me on my website, which is lisaperronbooks.com. And then they can also find me on Instagram at Lisa V. Perron and Blue Sky now, and sometimes on Twitter, though a little less so.
Yeah, I haven't gotten on Blue. I'm so tired. There's so many things to keep up with. Oh my goodness.
I know it's a lot to try to keep track of it all. Yeah.
Well, thank you so much, Lisa, for joining us. And thank you all for tuning in as well. And we'll see you again next week for another episode of Write This. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.